feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in a shrimp tank.
Thanks everybody for joining us today. We had an awesome show with Eric Pennington, managing partner of Spirit EQ. Um, are you a Picktown guy? I didn't realize. Are you in Pickerington?
Yes, I'm in Pickerington,
So we got
Ohio.
some Picktown Tigers here in the house. Forgot to mention that on the podcast, but appreciate you coming on. And why don't you share with our listeners a recap of really your journey from when you were in corporate America and how you made that transition across the street?
Yeah, sure. So primarily, I was the atypical corporate, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, corporate guy. And I spent 15 years or so in that. I noticed really early on that there was a big problem, and that was the development of people. And I wanted to find a way to help address that problem. And as things went left, right, and up and down, as most things in life do, I ultimately found myself on my own. And I had always wanted to be an entrepreneur in my head. But like many things, the lessons learned, and in my case, the hard way, it led me into developing a company around people development. So fast forward last 5 years, been with an organization called Spirit of EQ, and we focus on emotional intelligence development. I liken it to, we use data for measurement of where people are at, and then we help them or their organization to move to behavior change, because that's where the gold is found. And been doing it ever since.
It's great. Brian, do you have something?
Yeah, with today's episode being around the emotional intelligence, I think it's really interesting that it's a learned piece. And I think a lot of people just think you're born with it, you have it. Thinking through that, where would someone start building that foundation around the EQ side of the brain and becoming stronger, emotionally intelligent?
Yes, and I know that because our episode went so fast, and yet I felt like we could have stayed on for a lot longer. I would say it starts with understanding the difference between, for example, your IQ and EQ. IQ is pretty fixed. Our emotional intelligence is not. Okay. IQ today is probably going to be that way 10 years from now. EQ is dynamic in nature and learnable, right? So that implies a great deal of hope, right? The idea that, if I put in some work, if I show up to practice, I can get better at this. The other thing I would tell you is it has to do with how we begin to approach emotions. Many people, and it's our society, in many ways have turned it into, well, certain emotions are good and certain emotions are bad. But the reality is that emotions are really kind of neutral. If you look back in your past and think about when things didn't go well, when you got angry, it was typically when you reacted in the very moment that you felt it, the very seconds, right? So that leads us to believe that, hey, if we can get better at managing that, a la when I feel anger, when I feel sadness, and all of those things, I'm going to have a better outcome. Again, requires practice, work. I gotta make this learnable, right? When we do that, we position ourselves for the better decision. And if you're like me, I can look back over time where I've gone, my teenage daughter, I could just have a do-over, right? So that's kind of at a high level. And obviously, and if you're working with us as a client, we have tools to help make that happen as well.
I think one of the things that you said in the pre-show, which was something that really hit home, was when you were starting your journey as an entrepreneur. You said it has to be people first and you second. And elaborate a little bit on what that means to you and how it's impacted, your career.
Sure. And I'm probably not unlike any number of businesses where you're like, people are behind the other side of the equation, right? Or the transaction or the relationship. And when you're younger, you kind of believe your stuff is really the best. And you probably feel like, hey, that title is really kind of describing me. Over time, what I have learned, and I'm still learning, is that, Eric, you're a portal to the learning. So you can't be first, because if you're first, you're blocking them from getting the value. So the perspective is, let's focus on what they need. Okay. Let's put our emphasis on building tools, doing things, creating experiences where they can learn. And you be that, again, that portal, that vessel, if you will, to make that happen. I think there's no better way to run a business, just in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate the time. Thank you for joining us today. You've probably done a lot more than podcasts than we have. So, what number are you on with your podcast, which we didn't
Well,
even talk about today?
yeah, that's fine. We're getting close to episode 100, believe it
Wow.
or not.
Exciting.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's exciting stuff. Well, I feel like for some reason, we'll probably have you on again for a second conversation.
That'd be
So
awesome.
that'd be great.
Awesome.
So for all of our listeners, we appreciate everyone's time. Don't forget to find us on any of the streaming services. Hit that like button on YouTube, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks, everybody.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank.